Hi, for today's lesson, I want to take a look at the human immune system. What I'm finding is a lot of students don't quite understand what the immune system is all about, and the immune system has been in the news quite a bit lately. So let's take a look. First thing your immune system has to be able to do is tell the difference between self and non-self. Things that are non-self would be bacteria, viruses, even a splinter. So that's one of the first jobs your immune system has. In this photograph, you can actually see one of your immune cells, in this case it's a macrophage, that's this big white cell here, is actually capturing and engulfing bacterial cells. So that's one of the jobs of your immune system. Before we actually kick off your adaptive or specific immune response, you actually have a non-specific immune response sort of built in, and that's called innate immunity. And the reason for that is, well, you know how you feel when you get sick. You don't feel so good. And it takes a lot of energy to kick off a specific immune response. So your body's actually built in a non-specific defense mechanism. Things like physical barriers, which we see here. The skin, your gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, cilia, eyelashes, body hair. Those are all there to prevent things from actually entering your body. But if they did get through that, we actually have another layer of defense, which is kind of cool. Secretions, mucus, bile, gastric acid, saliva, tears, which have antimicrobial properties to them, and sweat. And if they get by that, we actually have another barrier, these non-specific cellular responses that I want to take a look at. So you could see we have our first line of defense, the skin, mucous membranes, secretions of the skin and mucous membranes. We have that second line of defense. You can see this fancy words, which I'm going to talk about, phagocytic leukocytes, which are a type of white blood cell that actually will engulf invading types of cells or viruses. And you have antimicrobial proteins and other things like that, also fever, which you know about if you've been sick lately. And as well, if they get by all that, again, this is all your innate immunity, we have that specific immunity or adaptive immunity. That's our third line of defense. So we have lots of defenses built in to try to prevent us from getting sick. So I've mentioned a few types of white blood cells, and you can see there are actually 5 types of white blood cells that we want to look at. However, we're going to focus on a neutrophil, we're going to focus on a lymphocyte, and we're going to focus on the monocyte. And you can see neutrophils, which make up 32 to almost 75% of our white blood cells. Their job is to engulf, and the big fancy word for eat and then destroy is called phagocytosis. That's their job, and they're part of the first line of defense. In other words, part of that whole innate immune response. However, we do have 2 other types of white blood cells that we're quite interested in, and in this, they are lymphocytes. Lymphocytes include B cells and T cells. And that's where we're going to talk about the antibodies and that sort of thing. And you can see lymphocytes make up between 13 and 50% of our immune response. And again, you see that they make up B cells, which is humoral immunity, and they make antibodies. And then finally, these T cells, which are cellular immunity. And finally, the last one I want to take a closer look at are these things called monocytes. You can see monocytes make up between 3.5 to 13% of our white blood cells. And you can see one of the things they do, again, there's that word phagocytosis, which means cell eating of pathogens, presentation of antigens to T cells, which I'm going to talk about, and monocytes will grow up into things called macrophages. So let's take a closer look at these different types of immune cells. So neutrophils, as I said, 40 to 70% of all white blood cells in humans, and they form this essential part of the innate immune response. Monocytes, the white blood cells that destroy cells by phagocytosis, largest type of leukocytes, so they're really big. You can see the difference under a microscope even. And, you know, they're part of the innate immune response, but they also are a big part of what we call specific immune response or adaptive immunity. Because one of the things they do is they present this antigen to T cells, and we're going to look at that. I want you to think of macrophages like security guards on patrol in your body. And they will track down, and you can see again, here's another macrophage, and it's engulfing these types of bacteria. And when they do find something, what macrophages can do, which is really cool, is they can release certain types of chemicals called cytokines. And what they'll do is signal and recruit other immune cells to help with the battle. So I think that's really neat. And your immune system is always at work, circulating and looking for things. Immune cells like to hang out in lymph nodes as well, your lymphatic systems throughout your body. That's why sometimes you'll get swollen glands under your chin or under your armpits, because those lymph nodes are active sites of basically a battle that's going on. So you can see these cytokines are molecules used for cell signaling or communication. And once they're released, they'll signal all these other different types of immune cells to come and say, hey, we got a battle going on. We kind of need your help. So there's the star of the show. Once the bacteria or virus or whatever the antigen is that's entered your body, the stars of the show are called lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are different types of white blood cells, and they include B cells, which we call B lymphocytes. And these cells produce antibodies, which you've probably heard of, that are very specific to the antigen. And we'll talk about that in a second. So antibodies will help mount a response to the infection. Another type of immune cell that's really important are known as T cells. And T lymphocytes, these are white blood cells that recognize and remove cells that have actually been infected with the antigen. So whether it's bacteria and virus, T cells will come around and actually destroy any of your own cells that have been infected. That way it can't spread the disease. So that is your adaptive specific immune response. And you know what you feel like when you're actually mounting an adaptive immune response. And you kind of feel a little bit not as energetic as you should be. And the reason for that is these guys are hard at work, and it takes a lot of energy to get these guys going. So you can see again, B cells, they'll produce antibodies, which we show like this. They attack invaders outside of cells, whereas T cells, they actually attack infected cells. So I want to take a look at some of the stars of the show again. You can see here are those B cells. They're going to make antibodies that are specific to the antigen. It's kind of like a lock and key principle. I think that's really, really important. Then we have these helper T cells, and they're called CD4, and I'm going to introduce them to you in the next slide. Then we have cytotoxic T cells, which are called CD8, and they'll be the ones that destroy any of your infected cells. And another cell that people don't really hear about are dendritic cells. They're antigen-presenting cells. They link that innate immune response, non-specific, with the adaptive immune response, which means specific. So they're going to activate T cells and B cells. So this is kind of cool. The immune system actually contains 3 types of what are called antigen-presenting cells, and I'll show you that in the next slide. And these dendritic cells are actually very professional. They're professional antigen-presenting cells, which is really kind of neat. So let's take a look at how your immune response actually works. Now I'm leaving out some big things, like for example, I'm not going to be talking about MHC proteins, which identify self and the types of cells. I'm not going to talk about the different types of antibodies. That's for another day. So this is just the basic immune response. So here comes a virus. A virus is detected by one of your immune cells, like this macrophage. Macrophage goes, you are non-self, you are an antigen. And what the macrophage does is it engulfs the virus and digests it. And that's called phagocytosis, and with lysis. And you have different organelles that will help digest it. And what it then does is displays part of the viral antigen on its cell membrane. And when that happens, it signals other cells, other immune cells, to come over and go, hey, look at the key that I found. Does anybody have a lock to match it? And one of these CD4 or T helper cells, which is the quarterback of the immune response, will come over and say, hey, wow, I recognize that key. And what I'm going to do is it'll bind here. And just make sure, again, this whole lock and key principle, that's why it's a specific immune response. It's kind of like you have one key to get into your house and no one else's key is going to work. It's the same thing with the immune response, lock and key. So the T helper cell says, okay, I see your key and I'm going to let other people know, and I'm going to spread it basically, and I'm going to make copies of this key, and so your immune response can really respond. And it signals B cells to come over and go, hey, look what I have, and make a copy of this key, and let's fight this together. And that's what it does. It signals and stimulates B cells. B cells produce antibodies. Okay, it also signals other T cells, and in this case, cytotoxic T cells. And it tells T cells, in this case the CD8 T cell, if you find any of your cells infected with this viral antigen, destroy them. So it kills infected cells, and that will sort of stop the spread of the disease within your body. Okay, so let's take another look at this. Here it is. Virus infects the cells. Your macrophage engulfs it. Macrophage will then display the viral antigen on the surface. It'll signal T helper cells to come over. T helper cells, look at the key and they go, okay, we're going to make copies of this, and we're going to make sure that your immune system, your adaptive immune response is going to work and neutralize this particular antigen. So it tells T cells, cytotoxic T cells, which will then go and destroy any cells infected within your body. It'll signal B cells. B cells will then make an antibody specific for that antigen, and that's the key here. Now it's made a copy, and it's saying, I have a copy of your key. I'm kind of making the lock that fits that. And in case of a virus, what it actually does is it neutralizes the virus. And by these antibodies binding to the antigen, in this case the spike protein in this virus, that virus cannot infect any more of your cells. And what that signals as well is a macrophage and other immune cells can come along and engulf and destroy by phagocytosis these neutralized viruses. So that's kind of cool. That's your immune response. The T cell response is known as the cellular immune response, and the humoral immune response is the B cells. In other words, these ones that make the antibodies. All right, now the other neat part is from this we get memory. We're going to get memory T cells, and we're going to get memory B cells. What does that mean? If that particular antigen, that key that's very specific, comes into your body, your immune system is going to recognize it. And that's what we have, memory B and memory T. So let's take a look at your primary and secondary immune response. So here's day 0. Let's say we're exposed to an antigen. In this case, let's say it's a virus. So the virus will evade our innate immune response. So now it's going to kick off that adaptive or specific immune response. So what happens is your B cells and T cells are going to kick in, and about 14 days you're going to get, and you can see this blue line here looks at the antibodies that are produced. So about 14 days you'll get an antibody response and hopefully neutralize that virus within those 14 days. Now, because you have memory, if you're exposed to that same antigen, you could see the secondary immune response is a lot greater. Why? Because we have memory, and you can see it's a lot quicker. Okay, so you're looking at about 14 to 21 days for a primary immune response. A secondary immune response will just take, in terms of 5 days to a week, and you can see the level of antibody is a lot higher. So that's why it's really important to have memory, and we could look at that. Now, there are 2 types of immunity, and I want you to be aware of the different types. Active immunity is where you actively make antibodies, and passive immunity is where you get a pre-synthesized antibody. For example, natural passive immunity is like a baby drinking breast milk from the mom. There are antibodies in that breast milk protecting that newborn baby while the baby is drinking breast milk. You can also get artificial passive immunity. For example, you're bit by a rattlesnake. You don't have 14 days to make an antibody to do that, so you'll get a pre-synthesized antibody or anti-venom, and that's called artificial passive immunity. In both these cases, you're getting a pre-synthesized antibody. Active immunity Natural is where you'll actually, be infected by something and you naturally make antibodies to that particular antigen or pathogen. Okay? Artificial active immunity is really important, and that's a vaccination. In terms of vaccination, again, if you waited 14 days for some particular diseases, by the time you make the antibody, you might be really, really sick and you could potentially die. So artificial active immunity, in other words, vaccinations, are extremely important. And that's why immunization schedules are really, really important. We want to have memory for particular diseases or antigens. For example, you could see here DPPT, diphtheria, pertussis, polio, tetanus, vaccinated at 2 months, vaccinated at 4 months, vaccinated at 6 months, and vaccinated again at 18 months. Again, we're building memory in the B cells and the T cells. And you can see again, this is a shot that we'll get throughout our lives. Memory, memory, memory. So we do get a lot of booster shots just to remind our immune system, if we're ever exposed to it, of the particular virus or bacteria, that we will just keep that memory going. So very important to get your vaccines to prevent you from getting sick. And you could see through Public Health Canada, then the number of cases of whooping cough now decreased through vaccination by 93%, measles 99%, chickenpox 99%, mumps 99%, diphtheria 100%, polio 100%. So vaccines work. So that was a look at our immune system. I hope that helps you understand it. Gets a little more complicated if you take grade 12 bio. I'll get into it a little bit more, the different types of antibodies and what we call major histocompatibility complex. But if you understand that, you really have a good working knowledge of your immune system. So I hope that helps, and we'll see you again soon.